Good evening, everybody. Welcome. We have a special treat tonight. Let me give you some background. In December, there's a pretty big conference that happens in Las Vegas called A4M. It's where the entire anti-aging longevity world comes together once a year, like many thousand people. Um, and in that, a lot of learning, a lot of knowledge sharing, a lot of demoing, everything's going on there. And it's funny that Dr. Tracy, who's on this call today, plays a significant role of the DNA company, and we had never met in person. And so we did there. And we got into a conversation around something that's a common sort of point of interest, common place of knowledge dropping, a common place that we believe is underserved and underspoken of, which is herbs. And her knowledge blew me away. Her application of it was awesome. So the obvious next step was got to share it with you guys, right? So tonight we're going to be talking about ancient herbs, the traditional sort of tool we've always had and used in a tradition that we've lost, whether it's Western culture, Eastern culture, native local cultures. It's always been somehow touching health, wellness, but we've lost it. So we're trying to bring it back, and we're trying to show you that there's science to prove it. So with that, let's bring on Dr. Tracy. Hey, how are you doing?
I'm well. How are you?
Good, good. So we got to talk about all that stuff in your head because there's so much cool stuff to be said about herbs that nobody realizes. You know, I was working on a product around menopause, and that's where, I was getting your feedback. And I realized, you never know what you don't know until you start hearing it, right? And so what Tracy's been doing in the background, so Tracy, as you guys know, does work with people at a clinical level. People book time with her, and she's been giving people protocols and answers that don't want medications or supplements. And sometimes say, "What could I drink a tea? Is there something else I can do?" And she's like, "Yeah, by the way, you can." And not just anecdotally, but the science behind it. And that's what we're going to talk about here today. So a lot of people that are here today are already familiar with the gene pathways. They've been tested. They know their stuff, looking for more solutions. Uh, as an example, there's a gene pathway called BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which is so important for neuroplasticity, so important for mood regulation, so important for things like trauma, the meaning of things, the weight of things, and being able to release and forgive, all dependent on BDNF. And I've been using tools like some peptides and some supplements that we know upregulate this pathway. But before any of that stuff existed, there was already herbs that did the same thing. And that maybe we start with that example to help people understand how this may work.
Absolutely. Um, so when we speak about things in Chinese medicine, sometimes we talk about them in different terms. But what some of the symptoms are that we would use herbs that we would use to strengthen BDNF are things like poor memory or feeling emotionally a little bit off um, to tonify the brain. So Huang Chi, which is astragalus, and Bai Sha, which is white peony, both together as a mini formula called a Dui Yao. They're both BDNF supportive. And when I found that out, I was like, that's so cool that that's what it does in this model. And here's what it does in this genetic model. And
Mm.
that's one of the things that I think is so cool about my particular skill set of Chinese medicine and um, functional genomics is that making those connections just, I could nerd out on that all day.
So it becomes an alternative for people that are maybe overburdened by, pill fatigue from supplements, or, don't want to go to the clinic anymore and do all these therapies and treatments. It's like these things can be teas, they can be in your food, they could actually add spice to your life, right? And so I was looking through some of the pathways you've been researching, and it's like it's touching everything we talk about, right? So one of the big areas that we know is it's very hard to find someone with any kind of chronic disease or systemic inflammation that doesn't also have a dysbiotic gut or some kind of gut health issue, right? It's almost always exclusively tied to chronic disease, whether it's leaky gut or autoimmune signals coming up from the gut. And I know that there's a gene we look at called FUT2 that talks about enzymatic activity, but you took it a bit further. You were looking at the digestive herbs that we know people go to health food stores and they buy these digestive products, but we didn't know the mechanism of action. So you actually detailed that. So what did you learn there?
Um, well, a lot of these, the herbs are transformed by gut microbiomes before absorption. So the FUT gene can affect how well some of these herbs are actually going to be absorbed, and how well you feel after taking them. So that's definitely something to keep in mind. But there are herbs that will help to sort of help with the mucosal lining and to sort of seal things up when they get a little bit leaky. And that's a really interesting thing. There was and how the herbs work together, I think, is also a really interesting point. I think I was telling you when we met last, Kashif, that there's a formula that they used to help support people when they were undergoing treatment for colon cancer.
Mhm.
And they used the formula and it helped people to tolerate the Western treatment, but it also helped the treatment to work better. So, of course, everyone and I'm not speaking disparagingly of Western science, but what they like to do is pull things apart and like extract things from it, right? Which is really helpful in many cases, but they couldn't figure out what to extract because they needed all of the herbs to work
Yeah.
together. And the other really nice thing that I like about herbs is that there tend to be fewer side effects because those constituents are less concentrated. So
Mhm.
all of the polyphenols and all of those things, instead of taking something that's really strong and one thing, instead it's more like eating food, right? So when we eat some broccoli, it doesn't just have one thing in it. And yes, people can take DIM and they can take IC3 and they can take sulforaphane. But if you eat broccoli, all of those things are in it together, along with a bunch of other things, vitamin C and things like that. And so to me, herbs feel more like food. I know I kind of went off on a tangent there, but
No, it makes sense because that's, I mean, in terms of even entering the context, right? Which is the everything that we extract is came from something that already exists. And the challenge is the food comes from dead soil, and so the food is dead. And so what it's supposed to give you doesn't give you anymore. But the herbalists, especially in the Chinese tradition, even where it's grown matters, right? And where it comes from matters. And the soil is the pharmacy. That's where the nutrition comes from. And the plant is the delivery method. It's the medicine, right? That comes out of the pharmacy. We have an American and even Canadian product problem where the soil is dead, right? So the broccoli unfortunately doesn't give us what's supposed to, but now we learn from the plant what the combinations are. We learn from the plant what's meant to be put together, right? And then we learn from plants how the symbiotic. What's really cool about what you said, and I think everyone needs to know, your genes can inform who may be challenged or needing herbs because, like you said, if the gut is struggling, that needs to be fixed first. And the FUT2 can tell you that. Like, should you jump on herbs first? Fix your gut so they work better. But then the genes can also inform which herbs to use. So it's kind of both ends, right? It's like we can determine for whom you're not ready, and we could also determine how to make you ready. So the same pot has a solution, which is really cool. But that also requires like deep knowledge, which you have, right? So what would be an example of something you would put together as a alternative to say a lot of people are using peptides or other tools to fix their gut uh, for say the gut wall if it's permeable or leaky.
I would probably be looking at something dealing with inflammation. I might also put something that was going to help. So, and this is where you can kind of layer in some supplementation. So, omega 3s are really important for that gut layer. So, I would be wanting to make sure that there were omega 3s in there. And so, I'd be working on reducing the inflammation and also making sure that the person was having the right. So, a lot of the gut microbiome likes to eat certain things. So, it would be a sort of a three-pronged um, strategy with omega 3s, the fiber, but increasing up to a larger amount from a smaller amount. Because sometimes when people are having dysbiosis, if they start to go with fiber too quickly, they feel a lot worse, and then they don't want to do it. And it's completely understandable. Anything that makes you feel worse, you don't want to do. But some of these polyphenols in these herbs are actually also good for the microbiome, and we
Mm,
would be reducing the inflammation with the herbs as well, and that would help the system. That would help with the symptoms of it, because the inflammation in inflammatory bowel syndrome and some of these other things is really, really uncomfortable.
mm. So I think I hear what you're saying, which is the herb kind of drives the genetic pathway, like go repair, right? It's a signal. And the environment needs to be ideal and conducive to repair, which is like let's have healthy bacteria. And then you need the building block, which is the omega or whatever other tool, right? So you need this sort of triangulation of you need the tool, the building block, you need the environment or terrain to be in a state for repair. Then you can add the herb, which actually signals go do this job, and it starts driving the pathways, right? So, as
Yeah.
an example of that, you actually laid out some herbs that actually upregulate specific pathways. So there's a big one that, everyone that looks at their genetic report looks at SOD1 and SOD2, right? These are oxidative stress, antioxidant, and in a nutshell, mitochondrial function genes, which is, primary to slowing your aging down, to not having chronic disease, to having cellular energy, being resilient and being able to recover. And now there's a specific herb, which I can't even try to pronounce, which will actually influence the pathway and cause it to express. So it's like a signal, like a peptide. So what is that?
Well, I think there were a few of them on there. So, some that increase SOD and GPX activity. One of them is Renshen, which is ginseng. Um, Another is Wu Weizha, which English is um, Shazandra. Oh, it's similar to what it is in
Latin?
Latin.
Yeah.
Yep. And then Gochitsa, which is goji berries. So you can get those at like a health food store. Um, all of those are going to increase that SOD and GPX activity. And so,
Mm,
of course, we want to also be, keeping in mind the SOD and GPX. If you're stronger in one than another, we want to pay attention to that. But
mm,
some of these will upregulate both of them. So that means
mm.
that whatever pace your SOD and GPX are working at, it's going to increase both of them at the same time. So I don't, what I would need to do a deeper dive to know if there's a difference in how much it impacts SOD versus GPX. But the fact that it does do both makes me feel better about it, because if you just increase the activity of, like, let's say SOD2, but not GPX at the same time, and you're slower in GPX, that could actually make some things worse. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, they create a bit of a bottleneck and a traffic jam.
Right,
It's like you're taking out the trash, but the door's closed. Right.
right.
So
Exactly.
yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's smart because this is where, knowledgeable application. It's like, and then you see a lot of this. You go into health food stores, like this does this, this does that, but the person that formulated didn't understand the pathway. And that's where, the things that you laid out in your research um, shows not just outcome. So, for example, ginkgo biloba. I've heard so many times you buy any brain supplement, any memory supplement has ginkgo biloba in it, right?
Hmm.
And it's known, okay, I'm gonna make a brain supplement as a formulator. I'm gonna add some ginkgo biloba. First of all, it will sell because that's what people want. Second, I know it works because it's what everybody else does. But most of those people have no idea what the mechanism of action is, right? And this is the incredible work that Dr. Tracy has done, and she's actually identified the mechanism of action. So why does that matter? Because if you know the mechanism, what it's doing, you're not just limited to what you think it does, right? Which is this is good for my brain, outcome, right? You know what that pathway does for it's like the central hub, and there's many spokes, right? So as an example, Utapi, that ginkgo biloba activates the NRF2 pathway, right? And now it would make sense why it's so helpful for the brain. NRF2 is this master control switch for all your detox genes, right? And all your antioxidant genes. And when you think about having poor antioxidant activity with the density of mitochondria that you have in your brain may get affected, right? And it may be one of the layers to cognitive decline in Alzheimer's. So if you can crank up the volume of cleanup, So it's not just ginkgo biloba is good for my brain. Ginkgo biloba activates NRF2. NRF2 means that there's more antioxidant activity. That means there's more cleanup, less oxidation, better function, more cellular energy. But that means it's not only limited to my brain. That means that's going to benefit me in my eyes and my cardiovascular system, and for women trying to get pregnant and their uterine lining, and for hair and skin and everything that cellular energy can drive. And this is what's really cool about identifying the pathway. You now have this puzzle piece for all sorts of problems. There's an area here where you talked about COMT, and you talked about it as in, COMT inhibitors. This is an interesting one because this is an area where we in the DNA report, COMT is separated from methylation, but we know it's a tail end directly tied. There aren't a lot of good solutions for COMT, but you found some. So what are they?
Well, some of those are actually COMT inhibitors. So someone with a slow COMT wouldn't necessarily want to take these. Scutellaria, which is Chinese skullcap.
Mm,
And it's good for some things, but it wouldn't necessarily be good for someone with a slow COMT. Speeding up a COMT is a little bit more tricky than necessarily slowing one down. But that's why if someone were, so sometimes people don't feel great on herbs. Someone else might feel great on them, but someone else might not. And it's because of these underlying things. I would think of it in terms of, oh, that's not the right pattern diagnosis for that herb, which I think is how the ancient cultures were figuring out genetics, right? Because most of them looked at body shape and all and symptoms and all of these things, and they were kind of putting together this pattern, this picture of who the person is. And
mhm.
that's what we're still doing. We're just doing it with DNA instead of with what's been passed down. We're doing it with new things instead of old ancient things. So someone might suddenly feel worse with skullcap, and someone else might feel significantly better if the COMT um, is making it so that they are clearing even faster. So one of the things that you would use skullcap for would be um, it can be kind of calming. So if someone is a little uh, if their dopamine, let's say, isn't sticking around for very long, um, this might be something that would kind of soothe, and you would think of it in terms of focus, right? So if you wanted to slow down a fast compt in the presence of suboptimal DRD2, this might be something. And I'm not saying no, none of you should be running out to the store and
Mm.
going and getting these things because you're part of a bigger picture. The herbs are part of a bigger picture. I'm just giving examples of a scenario where this might be helpful, right?
Yeah.
Instead of not helpful.
Yeah, I would suggest with the complexities, as simple as it sounds, you can hear there's already some complexities. I would say, work with someone like you have access to Dr. Tracy, call, book her, spend time with her because, picking that brilliant mind as opposed to the guesswork. Yeah, I agree with you. Don't just run out and do it. But skull cap, so I am that calm GG. I am that person, me, literally, that has the rapid clearance and can't experience satisfaction, right? Um, and so it's funny because early days, one of our formulators actually made a calm product, it was actually called Calm, that had American skull cap in it, right? And I felt great. And I didn't know the mechanism. I thought it was a calming, numbing, make your mood adjusted type of, but it was actually a herb driving a genetic pathway, which is so cool because we've identified the genes, but we're trying to figure out what causes their expression to speed up or slow down so we can manage it. That's the whole point of what everybody's doing here is I now know where my biology is broken. How do I intervene? And your job, my job, everybody's job is to curate all those solutions that speed things up and slow them down. So I was going through your notes again, and one area where we find consistently that people are struggling with chronic disease, metabolic, cardiovascular, even things like Alzheimer's, dementia, that the endothelial health isn't the best, right? And not only drug disease, but also things like recovery, like some people that are elderly that want to be able to train and go to the gym, but they're overburdened, or there's many areas why this blood vessel inner lining quality is so important, right? Um, and we didn't have a lot of solutions. So there's a couple supplement products. There's one called Arterisol. There's a product called Cardio Miracle. We sometimes talk about nitric oxide. There's some cool stuff out there. But you brought it right down to it. And this makes me wonder, are these the things that are in those supplements? Do they know? And so what are some of those things?
Um, I know that these are not in Arterisol because I take Arterisol
Okay.
occasionally. Um, but I haven't checked Cardio Miracle, but Danshen, which is a type of salvia. The other thing is when I'm saying English herb names, um, unless you know the Latin, or I guess the pinyin, it could be like ginseng. There are multiple different types of ginseng.
Yeah.
There are multiple types of salvia, and they all can be medicinal, but they might do slightly different things. And so what I'm talking about may not. I don't know if you can find this in the store anyway. So I just wanted to. I'm just very cautious.
Got it.
Um, so, um, salvia, which in Chinese medicine, this is what we would call in the blood moving category, which I think is so interesting, considering what I discovered it does from a genetic perspective, because it reduces endothelial oxidative stress and increases nitric oxide. And so it's protecting the endothelium and helping to prevent atherosclerosis. I can't say it.
Awesome.
Yes. Uh,
Sister.
I can say all the Chinese names, but not that one. So when I think of this, I think of 9p21 immediately.
Yeah, yeah.
And which for those of you who've seen me before on a webinar, it's one of my favorite genes. I don't know why. But I think of people who may have six copies as really needing something that's going to do this, that's going to help protect, especially if they aren't taking Western things or don't want to, that this can be another tool in the toolbox or a formula that contains it. There's one, Danshen Shanja, which is once again just two herbs. It's not we have formulas that are like 14 herbs, and then we have some that are just a couple.
Mhm.
And that this even helps with lowering lipids. So these are really powerful tools for health. And if someone, has a suboptimal is suboptimal in some of our cholesterol, and like I said, the 9p21, this would be something that under supervision would be a great option.
Mm. So, you make me think that people are listening, they're probably I don't know what that has spelled as, what's that called? I think people aren't even aware that there are things you're using already that fall into this category that you aren't even aware came from this world. So one example is like berberine. It's a very popular, well spoken of supplement today. And everyone's like, yep, I take berberine for my blood sugar, insulin resistance and blood sugar regulation. And then ask that person, what is berberine? And they probably don't know, right? And this is an example of one of the few that actually did get sort of well spoken of. So if when I say the word berberine, what herbal words start ticking in your head?
Huang Lian and Huang Bai. Huang means yellow. And if you've ever seen, it can mean other things too, but in this context, it means yellow. If,
Huh.
if you've ever seen berberine, like if you've ever seen a capsule of it, you can see that it's this like orangey yellow color.
Yep.
So those are two of the herbs that naturally contain it. And one of the things that I like about the idea of using herbs instead of just the extract berberine is what else is in those plants that's also good for you,
Mm.
that also might have an antioxidant. Just because we haven't isolated that compound doesn't mean that there isn't something else that's good in there. So those are they've been used for this purpose for a long time, and there is really good science backing up berberine for lowering blood sugar, some lowering hypertension. It's really good in PCOS. So it does after a time it can impact um, the gut microbiome. So there are always things to keep in mind about how long to do something, how to pulse things, and that's the other thing is that I would be unlikely to keep someone on an herbal formula that was exactly the same for 20 years.
Mm,
Now, they may have the same base formula, but there would be other things that would come and go from that formula. And I think that that helps the body to not adapt to it too much, and not have the effect be as good
mm.
as previously. So it would be working with the same idea, but incorporating different herbs into it.
So one thing I didn't expect when I was reading your research, when I hear the word herbs, I think about green leafy things, right? And I didn't think that this stretches beyond that. Essentially, we're saying what the earth can produce, right? That's not like a fruit or vegetable, but even then, there's benefit there too. And I was surprised to see that you were speaking about some mushrooms in your research, and it made sense, would fall in the same category. And once again, your interpretation and application was very different than what I've heard. And so, because you're analyzing the pathway that it influences, so I have this challenge where I deal with a lot of people that have hair loss issues, acne issues, prostate health issues, ovarian cysts, and a lot of that is rooted in excess dihydrotestosterone. Right? I mean, everyone here knows the SRD5A2 pathway determines the conversion of testosterone into DHT, right? Which, if you're a pro athlete or if you're a warrior on the battlefield, maybe it's a good thing, right? But if you live as a North American, somewhat sedentary, it's something you don't need. It's rocket fuel, and if it's left over, it's going to cause inflammation, which is where the acne and the hair loss and all that stuff comes from, right? So I was surprised to see that reishi, which we normally talk about for mood, brain type stuff, you applied to hormones. And
Yes.
so what is it doing when it comes to DHT?
It's having an anti-androgenic effect. So it's going to lower it's going to prevent the conversion of testosterone into that more potent DHT. And DHT is a lot more potent than testosterone. So this is for men and for women.
Hmm.
That can be really useful depending on, what other things that they have going on, and the rest of their hormone genetics, or how quickly they clear things. So it's how quickly are they making it from progesterone into testosterone? How quickly, if how quickly are they converting it, or how much of it from testosterone to DHT? And then the clearance is also really important. So if you can, if the weak link in your chain is the conversion of testosterone into DHT, then Linger is a wonderful herb for that.
Mm. Yeah, so there's ways to interpret. Again, this goes back to the very first thing we were saying, that step one is understanding the pathways that these foods and herbs influence, as opposed to, the label of this is good for your brain, this is good for your heart, but why? What is it doing? What's the mechanism of action? Because if you understand the pathway, then you know outcome, and it's more outcomes than you think. And the pathway here, I think, is the 5 alpha reductase, right? That's yeah, the tool for conversion.
Yes.
If you know that's the pathway, then you know the outcome. Then you know DHT is resolved. Now there's other things where another just something for people to consider is that there are herbs and tools that have been used, but because they've been heavily commercialized and Americanized, let's say, meaning processed, we don't know what they are anymore. Me, so, and I say this around something like licorice, for example. When I say the word licorice, people probably picture the candy that you got in your Halloween bag that you don't want, right? That's what people think licorice is. And that is the distilled, diluted, dumbed down version that we've been retaught from something that originally was amazing. And this has happened with a lot of these tools where the original thing with the original name was a super potent superfood. And for the palate, for shelf life, for addictive flavor, for cost of production, it's been diluted into something far more inferior. But in today's world, that's all we know, right? And so when you go take licorice back to its original form and what it really was before it turned into a candy, what are the mechanisms or what are the things that that can do as an example of the superfood that we've lost?
Well, for one thing, it upregulates SOD1 and 2 expression, right?
Yeah.
And it also can be another one of those things that lowers testosterone a little bit. Licorice used in very small amounts is in a lot of herbal formulas. One of my teachers said, this is because I went to school a long time ago, that it's the Julia Roberts of herbs, because back then Julia Roberts was in everything, which I'm dating myself. Um, but it's partially because it has this effect of sort of uh, mellowing out everything else and kind of pulling it together in the formula. And I know that that's not about pathways, but just to say that once again, it's like cooking. When I
Mhm.
think about these formulas, and we had to study them with the actual plants, right? So when we put together formulas in clinic, and we had to be able to identify them, it was reminding me of cooking. When you're sitting there and you're like, some of this and some of that, and then it will taste like this. But if you combine these with other things, it will taste like something else. And licorice just kind of made everything better. Now, that said, people with hypertension, you don't want too much licorice
Mm,
because it can raise the blood pressure in some cases. But it can also do these other wonderful things.
mm.
But I'm not talking about Twizzlers. Just to be
Yeah.
really clear,
Yeah.
Twizzlers do not have any of those medicinal effects that I just mentioned.
Yeah, and it's a shame that it's been the same name is given, but it's no longer what it really was supposed to be. Um, I used licorice once for I was doing a protocol around reversing GERD and reflux. And so I was actually increasing my stomach acid level to cause the stomach to sort of learn to collapse and close from that signal, right? And that was a very uncomfortable thing because the reflux would be pushing hard up my esophagus. So I used licorice root as like a coating tool for the esophageal tract, so I didn't feel the discomfort, and I was able to go through that purge, which through increasing my stomach acidity, I was actually able to strengthen the muscle because it was reacting more, and I no longer had the reflux or GERD. So yeah, that's what I'm saying. These things have so many benefits, but licorice has this cooling, blending, calming effect, not only for formulations but for the body too. Then there's things that people know and they know that they're good, but they don't know why and they don't know what they're good for, right? So you look at things like green tea, for example, and you look at a place like, for example, China, where it used to be, it didn't matter what you were doing today, you would probably be served green tea 3 to 4 times, right? You went and sat down with a friend, they gave you green tea. You went to go visit somebody, you got home, there was green tea. So it's like sit down, the next step is green tea. And when a culture has an antioxidant of that level and it's so consistent and it's so culturally sort of wound into your daily routine, then you have this protection. Then when the culture changes and shifts, and now you meet at McDonald's and Kentucky Fried Chicken because things have changed, as opposed to meeting at the local tea house, there's been a 400% increase in breast cancer in China, but there's also been a 400% increase in prostate cancer in China, right? It's a flat line for centuries, and all of a sudden, boom. So we also have to go back and ask the question, what were our ancestral habits that we've lost because of convenience, culture, whatever it is? And then what was in that thing that was helping us? So what is it the thing in green tea that was protecting them and all of a sudden there's all these problems?
Well, it definitely could be inhibiting, once again, the 5 alpha reductase pathway. So it also has a lot of antioxidants in it. But in terms of these hormonal cancers, I don't know what their SRD5A2 is, but for if all of those people stopped doing this thing that was helping to convert helping to stop the conversion of testosterone into DHT, that can definitely be affecting things. You know, tons of green tea for someone with a slower compt, they may notice that they don't feel amazing, but it would probably take quite a bit of green tea for that to happen. So the protective benefits in terms of antioxidants and the hormonal protection of it, I think, for many people is probably a really, really good thing. And I think one of those blue zone studies that I
Hmm.
read also spoke about tea time and how, on some of these smaller places where there's a lot of community, that they go and harvest things that are in season then and make them into a tea, and people come over and have the whole social thing, but it's around these teas that they drink at different times of the year. And these are the places where people are living a really long time. And so, is it the companionship? Is it the slower pace? Is it the nap? Is it also the tea? To your point about the green tea and the culture of that being lost.
Mm, yeah. That tea time thing was a very real thing. And now it's like culturally a source of guilt. I'm going to take a break in the middle of the day. Are you kidding me? Versus what does the human body actually need to thrive and survive? If you're here for longevity and health span, quality of life, then what does your day actually look like? Right? When do you take that break for your hormonal health, for your recharge, reset, for your nervous system, for all these things that perhaps need a rest, right? There's no other piece of equipment that you run 24 hours a day, right? So there's that thought. It's like these habits that we've lost. And given the technology, we're so productive, we can afford taking a break here and there. Why it's not meant to just burn us out, it's meant to support us so that we can get some life back, right? So if someone were to go about this, I understand there's so much to know. There's so many herbs and plants. There's books that are this thick that talk about all of them, and you've learned all this stuff. Um, what would you say are like the top key pathways that are supported, or is it a little bit everything? Like, would you say, antioxidant, hormone, neurochemical, and or is it sort of name a problem and I'll find a herb to solve it?
I mean, from where I'm coming from, it was an entire system of medicine. So any problem that you had to be able to be solved,
Right.
whether it was anxiety or a topical thing that you soaked your knee in if you twisted it and it swelled up. Because there are topical solutions for things as well.
Mhm.
Dermatology is like a whole other bag of worms. But um, for the purposes of what pathways are really clear, the ones that you just mentioned, that there's a lot of research about various things for those, and um, there are even herbs that work really similar in terms of mechanism to antidepressants, so much so that once again, if someone have doesn't secrete or reuptake a lot of serotonin, the herb might not work for them either, right? So it's like it's so similar to the way that the antidepressant works that if the antidepressant doesn't work, it's not going to work, but it might have fewer side effects.
Mm.
So if it can help a tiny bit, but without the side effects, it might be worth trying, as opposed to trying something that's also not going to work super well, but will have a list of side effects that people might not want.
Yeah, that's where people, it's like this all this chemistry and science behind the medication, and you think it's precise and effective because of that, without realizing the herb is driving the exact same pathway and mechanism. It's literally doing the same thing.
Yes.
Where did the molecule and the drug come from? Something that already exists. They aren't created typically. They're copies. I'll give you an example of that. There's a plant called spirulina, right? And blue spirulina, the pigment that makes it blue is called phycocyanin, right? Phycocyanin. And if you take phycocyanin and throw it in a petri dish with cancer, it will kill the cancer cell. And now, when you look at modern day chemotherapy, most of them are synthesized phycocyanin that are trademarkable and patentable because spirulina is not trademarkable and patentable. It's a plant, right? So why am I saying this? Because the mechanism, it already exists. Nobody knew and documented until there was Chinese medicine, which is old, until people like you started learning and deciphering all this stuff. So I just want people to be sort of aware that this is not oh, it's just a herb, right? It's not, oh, it's just a plant. Yeah, maybe it's like a weak version of it. No, it's the source that got synthesized, and it is operating on the same pathway. It's literally the same thing. If you understand what to use for what purpose, that's the key, right? And you also know how to source stuff that is from. ancestral soil that is full of nutrients and nutrient dense, right? Um, so okay, so hormones, antioxidation, neurochemicals are big ones,
Mm-hmm.
right? Then
Mm-hmm.
we already talked about things that are like metabolic, like berberine, and there's things that are for cardiovascular. So there's stuff that resolves, even if you were to look out and look for like disease risk type markers, right?
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Mm-hmm.
we talked about things around, well, we didn't talk about things around actual organs. So can we identify, for example, if someone has an ApoE3/4 and now they're concerned about Alzheimer's risk, if somebody has poor ACE activity and they're concerned about kidney risk, you've mapped out things that are mechanism and pathways. Can we also directly tie herbs to specific organ health?
Well, yes, and um, the way that the organ systems are put together in Chinese medicine are slightly different in that they overlap with Western, but aren't precise. They are not exactly the same. But there are things that are considered protective, some things that are protective of the liver, for instance, which, boy, if that's an
Yeah,
organ that needs some protection, that would be one for
yeah.
sure because it's working hard these days. It's working really hard with everything that's in the environment and all of that stuff, which is the other thing. You know, one of the things that I really like about the Black Label supplements is that there are no fillers. You know exactly what you're getting.
Mm,
They're very pure. If you're taking herbs from a reputable place, most of the time they have no filler in them, or it's like something to make them not stick together so that they don't clump. But it's like rice flour or something like that. Um, you want to be very careful about your sourcing of things, as Kashif was saying, because sometimes if you order something off from like Amazon or something like that,
mhm,
there is heavy metal in some of the soil in places where some of these plants grow, and so you want to make sure that a company, and this is where working with a practitioner or a trusted source, um, is really important because you don't want to be putting things in at the same time that you're trying to heal yourself that are going to make you sick in a different way, right?
mm,
So, just as we want to be really picky about our supplements, we also want to be picky about where our herbs come from. And so, like you said, the nutrient rich soil, but by nutrients we don't necessarily mean lead, for instance. Like that's not something that we want. So,
Do you think like going to Chinatown to the traditional Chinese herbalist is the best thing to do right now?
it depends what they're using and
Mm-hmm.
where they're getting it, and if they have been careful about where they're sourcing it from.
Mm-hmm.
The companies that I use do really good independent testing to make sure that the plant is what it's supposed to be, because
Mm-hmm.
there can be a lot of fake things or mistakes that can be made. So they really analyze that it is in fact the correct plant, that it's not contaminated with anything that we don't want, pesticides, heavy metals, things like that. Um, yeah, those are the things that need to be screened, or like bacteria or anything like that, which would be less common. But we still want to make sure that all of that is on the up and up. So
Yeah.
that's what I look for in a company, and they will usually have that listed on their website. So if the thing about going to Chinatown, I can't necessarily read the bottles,
Mm-hmm.
so I can't see if it has anything saying that it's been tested to make sure that what is in there is supposed to be in there is in fact in there and that it doesn't contain heavy metals. So,
Mm. Okay. Yeah, I know. I mean, people that do this have their trusted sources, but for many people here, this is brand new. I would suggest, if you want to take this route and explore it, don't go in blind. Book some time with Dr. Tracy, find someone to coach and guide you. It's not just where to get it from, and it's also like, what do you actually need? You don't want to go back to the one size fits all. Oh, this herb is good for that. There's so much interplay between these. They're powerful signals. It's just like if someone were to go take 10 different supplements, there's going to be contraindications, there's going to be interactions, right? There's going to be things that support each other, there's going to be things that deplete each other. So, before you get it right off the bat, and that's where working with someone who knows what they're doing, working with Tracy, which I'm hoping to do also, by the way. I want to book some time with you to go through my stuff because I believe that we should start with what the earth already gives us. That's what medicine was meant to be. We just lost the knowledge, so let's just go back, right? um, we're seeing that, we're talking about genetic pathways, but there's even peptide pathways. And this is a project that I'm working on that I was talking to you about, where we're seeing, for example, there's a product out there from New Zealand that is being sold as a alternative to Ozempic, and it's a natural supplement, right? So Ozempic is a peptide that kind of activates the GLP system. GLP is, think of it as this like signaling system in your esophageal tract that is looking for poisonous food, so that if you were to eat poisonous food, it should shut your hunger off. It's trying to protect you, right? And that peptide is signaling turn on GLP, cut your appetite, less calories in, fat burning off your body. Most poisonous foods are bitter. And so there are bitter herbs, there are bitter plants that have been, formulated into pill cocktails that work just like these peptides, right? And it's not like they're replacing, they're literally driving the same pathway. They're activating as GLP agonists the same outcome, right? And so, but then you realize that that's where we learned it from, right? That's where we learned it from. So I'm only saying this because all of the things you do, whether it's like going for red light, whether it's going for a cold plunge, whether it's taking a supplement, whether it's taking an antidepressant, these are all signals in your body that are driving biology and shifts in biology. And there's typically a plant or herb that already does that. Knowledge, right? Knowledge, skillfully putting things together, reviewing DNA to understand what the priorities are. There's work there, and that's where I wouldn't go in blind. Work with someone like Dr. Tracy to create that map, and then you'll have this sense of confidence you can move forward, right? So, if you were to one last thought, 'cause I know we need to make time for Q&A. Somebody has their herbal plan done, right? What does that look like? Are they drinking various teas all day? Do they have tinctures? Are they eating things that they sprinkle on their food?
Well, the good news is that there's something kind of for everyone, right? So there are so many different ways. If something is going to be truly customized 100% for the individual, then it's usually better to go either with the raw herbs or with a powdered formula where they have um, boiled the herbs as many times as it takes to extract the important parts from it, and then they dry it and they put it into a bottle, and then that can be mixed in different ways so that it can be completely customized. Um, Now, if someone can't find someone to do that, or that seems like that's just over the top, they come in tinctures, they come in pills, they do come in powders that you could put in your protein shake. You know what I mean? So there are all of these different ways of getting the medicine into people, and it just depends on the lifestyle of the person. So most people these days do not want to cook the herbs at home and make a tea out of them. That's because it can take time, and sometimes they don't like the smell of it, depending on what it is, or sometimes it smells great and then they want to cook it all the time on the stove. But it really depends on what it is. So it's there's something for everyone.
Mm. Yeah, the tea thought you just gave me a memory of I this habit for me was formed by my dad before he passed away, where he loved the idea of going. I grew up in Vancouver. Vancouver has a very large Chinatown, and we used to go down there, and the herbalist would check your pulse, and they're looking for chi energy and the kidney, liver, heart health, right? And then they don't even ask you why you're there or what your problem is. They're just reading energy and they're saying, here's your prescription. Then you go down the hall and somebody packs some herbs in a bag and perhaps other things too, some roots and mushrooms. And then you take it home and boil it. And then your house smells like a herbal factory,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And it's like somebody comes over, is like, what happened here? So, anyways, I'm just saying that because that's how things start. But there's so many other ways to do it, right? It can be a tea if that's what you want. It can be a tincture, like you said. There's so many ways now. The traditional way was boiling and drinking the tea, right?
Yep,
Uh,
absolutely.
these things, these things are potent. and that's evidenced by what they smell like, right?
Yes, it's totally
They're,
true.
yeah, they're
And when
very,
I was in school, I did my herbs that way, and I'm
yeah,
sure my neighbors loved me at the time. But that, I was trying to have the whole experience, right?
yeah. So I had, by the way, at the time, extreme eczema, which came back in my adult life when I didn't take care of myself, which was one of the reasons that I got pushed towards seeking health and wellness and, working on this company. Um, I had eczema so bad at that time when I was in my early teens that my earlobe would disconnect from my head from just dry skin chipping all the way up to the cartilage. I would get like a second mouth forming in my my neck from just dry skin, like extreme, right? And I was told you have allergies, right? It's seasonal allergies. Everybody gets them. Yours are just expressing a little more extreme. And my dad said, no, humans are not supposed to feel like this, right? So he said, what's wrong with your organs? What's wrong with your systems? And he took me to these herbalists, and it sounds too good to be true. But I remember it was a couple months in, gone. Allergies gone, right? So I didn't have allergies. I had a histamine response that was out of whack because of other things going on in my body. I had a kidney and liver that were overloaded, lack of blood flow, lack of nutrient delivery. And so the herbs signaled the systems and pathways as opposed to like, hey, let's stop the nasal drip from the allergy. Hey, let's give you some hydration here to heal the wound. It was no, let's fix the organ, let's fix the systems. So they don't only act like, let's call them, peptides and pills, but they also act like bioregulators, like direct organ support, depending if you know what to do with them. And that comes back to the formulating and putting things together, right? Okay, so there's questions coming through here already. Um, we will let's open up the Q&A box is already full of questions. I see some in the chat. There's a couple here in the chat. We'll just quickly address. If I can, I will. Otherwise, we'll throw it to Tracy, and then we'll go through this Q&A. So somebody just said, should tinctures be taken on an empty stomach? Is that like a case by case, or are they all sort of blanket statement?
It depends, because some things would probably work better on an empty stomach, and some of them would actually be better taken with food. So that would depend. And also, what it comes down to is, can you take it on an empty stomach, or does it make you feel sick? You know what I mean? Like, it's better to get them in there than it is to take it on an empty stomach. But
Mm-hmm.
there are some times when it would be best on an empty stomach. But just to say blanket all tinctures, that's not the case.
Yeah, okay. Leah's saying, and guys, if you have questions, put them into the Q&A. I'm just looking at these last couple questions here, then we're going to move to the Q&A. We're not going to see the chat after that, just to make sure your question actually gets answered. Um, let's see. Where do we go? In
Oh,
fact,
I think that we've got full in the Q&A.
oh, I
And
see.
so
Okay, let's go through that first because people who put their questions in the Q&A, let's just address those first. Lisa says, my DNA results show I'm co-dominant, so both androgen and estrogen dominant. I'm taking calcium diglucarate for the estrogen not being able to leave my body. GI map test revealed this. How do I balance out my hormones with herbal medicine? One thought, Lisa, first of all, the GI map is a gut test, right? And um, when you look at the gut in terms of estrogen, that often has to do with reconjugation or recycling of estrogen, right? So I think just the interpretation, there's a bit of a nuance there, which is not like, hey, I need something to clear the estrogen, get rid of it. It's more like you're reconjugating. And now really the answer is balancing your gut microbiome bacteria, right? So there's an imbalance there, which is leading to that recycling, right? And so your gut test, the GI map, is telling you that this imbalance will lead to reconjugation of estrogen. So go create the balance. So wherever you found the imbalances in your GI map are the things to address. Now, that being said, there are herbs that can address gut microbiome imbalance, mucal layer, gut repair, right? And that's where you would work with someone like Tracy to figure out your unique circumstance with that GI map, what the right tools are. Because there's so many, you have to get it right. Susan, if someone has suboptimal detox pathways, how can they learn which herbs go through what detox pathways and whether a herb is good choice for genetics? Um, so there's so many that I would say I don't think there's a good resource out there for people to learn, unless you're going to go to China and spend time in a herbal school, right? Which is what people literally do, you know. Otherwise, it's working with someone like Tracy. But any other recommendations on where someone might learn more?
it it's all a lot more, and I'm not trying to sound like a jerk saying this. It's all a lot more complicated than it seems. So there isn't a resource that I could point to without also wanting someone to read. Whoa, sorry, I just knocked my water bottle over. Wanting to read them to read a whole lot more theory and things like that, and to know more about it in general. So,
Yeah. I think it's kind of like DNA, where you can go learn about all these independent genes, but then you still don't know how to solve a problem because the functional interpretation, the pathways, the systems, how these things interact with each other, not to discourage you from learning, but to say that there's a huge difference between someone who this is all they've done and lived and breathed for a while versus trying to go to a guidebook, right? Yes, the guidebook is a good starting point, and there's plenty of books on herbs and plants and their healing power. I would just tell you that the precision of using your DNA, working with someone like Dr. Tracy, the time you save and the efficiency and just getting it done properly, you know. But that being said, there are a lot of books. You can go to any bookstore and you'll find them, right? So Sandhya is saying, I came across a person who took ashwagandha, had liver markers off the chart. These numbers came down when they stopped taking this herb. So she's asking about safety when it drew liver markers up.
right. And so this is, was it just the ashwagandha? Was there something else in there? We don't really know. Some people also have a strange response to ashwagandha. So just ashwagandha can be an amazing herb.
Mhm.
Um, it can be a really good adaptogen. Um, but some people have a strange reaction where it actually makes them um, not take pleasure in their things that used to give them pleasure. You know what I mean? Like their everyday things. They don't love their hobbies anymore and things like that. So or worse. So once again, you know, just because it's in the health food store or something, or your friend is taking it, doesn't necessarily mean it's good for you. And this
Mhm.
is also why making sure that the company that you get them from is that it really is ashwagandha and that you
Yeah.
know what else is in there is important.
That was my first thought when they talked about the liver, is there's so many fillers and there's so many fake products out there. It's to the point where government bodies from these various countries that are famous for certain herbs are now starting to certify them because there's so many fakes, and it's making their actual native industry, it's affecting the native industry because it's like, well, the fake stuff makes our real stuff look bad. So they're starting to so that is a big problem. It's fake and the fillers, right? But yes, people do react to ashwagandha. Often it is the fake and the fillers. And if you're needing help, your liver and kidney may already be struggling and you're at that borderline mast cell activation. Now you throw some fake filler on top of it, and every day, right, you're going to react. William saying, I have psoriasis. What herbs would help? So, William, psoriasis, let's take a step back and call it what it is. It's autoimmunity, right? So psoriasis is one way that autoimmunity will express itself. You could have a thyroid issue, you could have rheumatoid arthritis, you could have lupus, or you could have psoriasis. These are all autoimmune outcomes. So I guess the real question, Dr. Tracy, is what herbs help modulate the immune system?
Well, a lot of them do, and some of them are going to increase the immune system, and some of them are going to sort of not downregulate the immune system, but kind of balance out what may be excessive, right? Um, I had a thought that I wanted to say that was is related, but not directly answering this question. But now I've lost both pieces. So I'm not going to make like more herb recommendations directly without knowing the full scope of someone's health because I, I can't do that on a webinar. That's not the right thing to do. But now I can't remember. There was something important that I was going to say about that. Now I've forgotten it. So I guess we'll go on to the next one,
Yeah.
and then
No,
when
I
I think of it,
understand
I'll
that.
come back to it.
And I think that that theme is probably going to come up a lot today. I have this what herb, I have this what herb, I have this what herb. And I totally get what you're saying is like somebody's going to go do something and hurt themselves, right? And versus let's learn a little more. Like, for example, William said I have psoriasis without saying I have autoimmunity, and like going to solve the psoriasis without understanding this is an immune system issue could hurt you, right? So or it may not work and then you blame the thing it didn't work, right? So that's where I do agree, like booking time with Tracy, working with somebody that understands herbs, getting it right, to not only not hurt yourself, but to really have a great outcome. I think it's important.
I thought
What,
of it. I thought of
yeah,
it, which is
okay,
this,
sure.
that sometimes it can also be that one is trying to add something for a purpose,
Mm-hmm.
but the body's too toxic to handle it. So
Mm,
that herb, after fixing some of the detox pathways, whether it's methylation or glutathionization, or whether it's SOD and GPI, like paying it, knowing your genetics, making sure that you're detoxing properly,
mm-hmm.
that you're eating well for your body, that you know yourself, and then um, putting something else in there can make a big difference. So sometimes it's about the order in which you're doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And herbs can be supportive in that, but some of them for a specific problem aren't going to help with detox. So we mentioned some today that will help with detox. And
Mm-hmm.
so we would want to start with those and then move into something that was a little bit more potent, perhaps, because if you can't detox it, you will feel worse and your
Yeah.
liver enzymes will go up because your liver is already taxed, maybe, from something else we don't know, right? So, or
No,
maybe
you're
it's
right.
borderline, it's right on the edge.
This is where good functional medicine, if you're working on anything that's beyond the common cold, like something significant, the answer is usually this is a 2-year project, right? If you have fibromyalgia, Lyme disease, propensity towards autoimmunity, whatever it is, the answer should be this is a 2-year project. Because the question of what do I take for this is a question rooted in how you've been taught to think based on the pharma answer, a pill for an ill, right? That's not the way to fix a problem. The way to fix a problem is first the terrain has to be settled, right? You don't start fixing until the terrain is settled. What does that mean? Nervous system, gut, toxic burden, right? Then you need time to repair organ systems, have proper blood flow, proper nutrient delivery, proper movement, the lymphs are open and drained, and once you're in a proper place to give your body ROI, then you start adding the I'm gonna fix this problem, right? But usually by the time you get to that point, the problem's already a very small version of itself because you've removed all the blocks, right? So, anyways, for what Tracy's saying, I agree, and I approach things the same way, which is got to protocol things out, you got to phase them, and knowing the answer to something like psoriasis, yes, the final answer might be here's the cocktail of herbs that modulate your nerves or your immune system, but how did you even get here? Because that's still happening, whatever got you here, right? So let's resolve that first. Heidi's saying, what was the gene? He just asked, good for skin. I think we were talking about DHT, and that was the SRD5A2 gene. Not that it's good for skin, but if your SRD5A2 gene is a CG or G gene, you're making too much DHT, that's bad for your skin, right? So it's going to cause acne, cystic acne, can create dryness as you age, even oily can do both, right? So it was more about low DHT levels, you'll see your skin improve. Okay, Elvin saying, what would work to slow down dopamine clearance? So that thing around slowing down a fast comp.
Right. And so we were talking about how now, sorry, I'm uh starting to get a little tired.
Yeah, Ginkgo biloba.
Yeah, right.
Huh.
So there are a bunch of things that can slow it down slightly, and even ginseng in high doses can be one of them. But I think we were talking at I'm trying to think of what herb we were talking about in that moment. Oh, it was skullcap.
Hmm.
That was the one we were talking about. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure, skull cap. And now, if somebody has another question, which is an interesting follow-up, so so they're worried now about slowing down their COMT, which they want maybe for the benefit of their hormones. So any other risk factors that may slow down the COMT, that's this person's particular concern.
Um, yes, there I have several of them here that I looked up. If I can just find them. It's such a long document. And I
Yeah,
as I said,
the
unfortunately I'm
research
getting
is awesome. This is where I would urge people like sit down with Tracy even just for one session and figure it like you'll be shocked how much knowledge she's gathered and put together. Um, Most of it, to be straightforward, is stuff I had not seen before. You know, I've been studying herbs for some time. I've worked with master herbalists. There's one right here in Toronto that I've worked with before, and I have not heard this stuff before. So just know that you have somebody here in front of you that you have access to, as DNA company clients. Book some time with her and just get this done properly, right? But sorry, I interrupted you.
No, that's okay. Well, the thing is that there are many because a lot of the herbs have polyphenols in it, but not all of the polyphenols are going to react that way. So this is where um, when someone's putting together an herbal formula based on pattern,
Mm-hmm.
um, there are going to be things that kind of mediate the more drastic effects of another one, right? So if one might, and I didn't know any of this. It was I always thought of it in the Chinese medicine terms, but in doing research about genetics, there are some instances where I'm looking at herbs that one of them is going to speed up a pathway and the other one's going to slow it down. And so together they're kind of keeping things static while working on this other problem entirely. And I think that that's just so interesting. But if you wanted to speed up or slow down something, I'm interested to see the combinations of herbs that would stack to do that particular thing. So how I would approach it would not be to list all of the herbs that slow down COMT because also we don't know how much. It would depend on the herb. And
Mm-hmm.
the benefit to it might be better in a temporary situation than the negative consequence of that. So it's all very person specific, right?
Yeah.
Genes are the basis, but we have to look at the person uh,
Mm-hmm.
as more than just their genes and as more than just their problems.
Because it's their genes plus their environment, plus their context, plus their nutrients, plus their lifestyle, the net result of their phenotype, right?
Yes.
So Marianne's asking about with 9P21, she has 6 copies, which is the extreme suboptimal. The herbs around, you had mentioned, I think it was DSF, right?
Yeah, well, yeah, Don Shen.
Right here.
Yeah,
Yeah,
was
so
the one that I had
Johnson,
mentioned.
that was the replacement. So, the recommendations of Arterisol and Cardio Miracle are still the recommendations, made by the DNA company, but Donshen, kind of similar mechanism of action, right? Okay, William's saying I have ApoE34, mother had dementia. I read fat is good for brain, yet doctors prescribe me a statin. Is there a substitute or different herb to take? And should cholesterol stay above 200? So yeah, there's a direct correlation with the the overwhelming statin prescriptions out there and the overwhelming increase in dementia, right? That's not a coincidence. In fact, the science is pretty clear that cholesterol is a key anti-inflammatory molecule. It is a foundational ingredient for hormone production, and it is a ingredient to build your brain. You need fat, you need cholesterol. And so when you suppress, as opposed to saying oxidized or damaged cholesterol molecules can create plaque, which means toxic burden plus cholesterol, we just blame the cholesterol, the raw ingredient, and suppress it with the statin. And then you're also suppressing anti-inflammatory activity, testosterone production, and brain health. So, William, your question is on point. Yeah, you're right. Right. So then what's an alternative? So we talked about ginkgo biloba, for example, right? A known herb that will upregulate brain function. There's other tools that upregulate BDNF, which are neuroplasticity pathways like whole fruit coffee extract, right? There are other tools you can use. Anything else you would recommend?
I think that yeah, it would depend. It would depend on the person. And once again, even with the Don Shen, I couldn't necessarily recommend that to a specific person on a
Yeah.
webinar without knowing what medications they're on, what, or anything like that. So I'm not suggesting that anyone run out and get that if they have 6 copies of 9P21.
Yeah,
Just
and keep in mind that the reason why we had this conversation tonight is not because, here's some herbs. These are powerful signals, right? We're trying to bring to you very functional, useful tools and a new set of knowledge, maybe something for you to explore. But the signals are powerful, so they need to be managed properly. Just like it would be irresponsible for me to say, here's a peptide for your heart, not knowing what's going on in your body, peptides can also fuel cancer cell growth. If I didn't understand that about you first, right? This is why it's important to personalize this, but it is a path where you get control back from a very natural, no side effect way if you do it properly, right? Marianne saying sawtooth CT, husband can take ashwagandha. How often? Sorry. I actually give it to him when he's cranky and it turns him around very quickly. Yes, very good adaptogenically, great for the brain and mood. So I only give it once a month. Oh, he's cranky once a month. So now we have some inside information. Can I give it weekly? It's 150 milligrams, very much below the daily limit on the bottle. Just concerned about all the possible interactions. Yeah, if there's an interaction, you would see it, right? So when it comes to ashwagandha, yes, some people will react, but they're going to react. You're going to know, right? So it is meant for daily consumption. It's meant to be as per the label on the bottle. It's more so if they can't tolerate it, then you need to, work with someone like Dr. Tracy who can figure out through detective work like what's going on there, right? Um, Dirk, hey Dirk, how you doing? My question won't fit in the text, so I'll send it in three parts. This is gonna be what they call a doozy. Dirk is saying, pardon his long-winded question. Modern pharmacology evolved from herbs. Yes, these are all derivatives of things that already exist, right? Chinese medicine, Ayurvedic, yes. It's based on applying scientific method to understand and validate herbal cures and reductionism to find them and extract the most powerful molecules. We call vitamin C from foods like citrus. Exactly, right? There's no consideration as to what the other chemical constitutes were in the lemon. Exactly. That's what Dr. Tracy was saying, that there's a context, right? It's like you take the vitamin D, which is as a powerful antioxidant, but the context it's delivered in is a whole food. And what else is going on in that whole food? Just like, hey, the sun gives me vitamin D, but what else is the sun giving me, right? In the right combination. So yes, you're right. Let me just go to the rest of Dirk's thing. Scientists dismiss anecdotal evidence, and rightfully so, in small sample sizes without rigorous proof. But anecdotal evidence over thousands of years, exactly true, should not be looked on upon. Remember, this process of the double-blind placebo clinical what do you call it again? The evidence-based model was partly designed for safety and efficacy, but it was also partly designed for control, right? That the anecdotes aren't allowed. And so control goes back to whoever can afford the evidence-based clinical trial. And this is why nobody pays for research on food, right? What's the benefit to gain? There are many published studies. Going to PubMed, we've been talking about statins today, probably the number one prescribed drug. I think if you go onto PubMed where all the studies are, I think there's like 11,000 publications on statins. There's 120,000 publications on vitamin D. There's 10 times the volume of information, but because it's not patentable or trademarkable, it's not shared, right? Many people are trying to study, and that's the, what we don't know. We think there's no research. There actually is, right? There's a lot of research. You can Google even the herbs we talked about tonight, and you'll find studies, right? They may not be from the United States. They might be from Japan, China, right? And inclusive of the United States, but you'll find a lot from the East. But there are studies. But sorry, let me keep going. One, of course, no one is going to fund exactly the trial. That's what we were just saying. Dirk says, I suppose indigenous medicine evolved from this form of biohacking, the clinical trial being just the thousands of years, yes, of knowing the outcome. The internet allows us to accelerate experiential biohacking to compress the time frame. And that's a really cool concept where there's people talking about bringing data together. And there's a company doing this called Heads Up Health, which is correlating all this anecdotal data into one central pool of data so that we can prove stuff out. So, Dirk, there are actually people trying to do this right now. We need to figure out how to add some rigor to biohacking to get some uniformity. So that, Dirk, there is an answer for that. There are some platforms that are taking all the data from Aura rings and Whoop wristwatches and your Apple Watch and clinical evidence anecdotally from all these functional medicine clinics, and they are putting them into one central repository of data so that it's overwhelming and hard to dispute. And that's happening right now, right? There are companies doing that, it's just not spoken of yet, but the data is being collected for sure, right? Rebecca, anything topical for cell skin issues if I don't want to cut? Topical for basal cell. I'm not familiar with the answer to that. I don't know.
Yeah, I wouldn't I would have to look into that.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know
Yeah.
the answer. Yeah. Cynthia saying Supreme Nutrition Products does what you require from herbs. That's good. A great resource. So people can check that. Just again, safety, efficacy, purity, check that stuff, right? Check for third party purity, but good that we have a solution. Myra, can you recommend a trusted source? So Myra, right above you, Cynthia recommended one, but I would also say, you know, it's one thing to get access to herbs. It's a whole other thing to know how to navigate and have spoken to someone like Dr. Tracy or whoever you have access to get that plan finalized, right? Lisa, are herbs ever not good for your liver or other organs? Aside from quality and quantity, I've read where some detox herbs can damage the liver. Any herbs filtered through your liver as medications are. I do not do well with meds, usually nausea, but no problem with supplements. I assume this is related to your poor detoxing, GSTM, GS1, G. Yeah, so you're right on one end that the medications do need to be detoxified. This is why we can predict side effects in some people genetically, right? And this is why, for example, this whole argument over the RFK administration saying Tylenol causes autism. Where did that come from? Well, for some people, the glutathione pathway that's required to process the acetaminophen, the drug in the Tylenol, isn't working. And it leads to neural inflammation, right? So that's an example of where that's true. Now, is that also true in herbs? Herbs are powerful, right? They are powerful signals, and when you take them, they're concentrates. They're been concentrated down to a tincture, to a powder, right? So you're getting it in high, sort of dense volume per whatever serving, right? So this goes back again to the same thing. Guidance is important, right? Not going in blind. Sometimes the recommended dose isn't enough based on your pathways. But many times, you know, going on it on your own and saying, this feels good, I think I'm going to try more is too much, right? That's a very common thing that people do, right? Like this feels good, let me try some more. And what is the upper limit? How do you know? Right. So now going back to the question about the liver, Dr. Tracy can give her thoughts. What I've seen is when somebody already has a burden, when somebody already has a toxic burden, when somebody already has, mast cell activation, somebody already has, they live near agriculture, they're breathing in chemicals all day long. They work in industry, they're breathing in chemicals all day long, and they're already at a 7 out of 10. Now you're telling your body to process a powerful signal when the terrain wasn't ready. So is this herb bad for your liver? Or is this herb a burden on your liver when your liver is already at a 7 out of 10? And if you were to work on the terrain first and get your body ready to use the herb, would you not have that reaction? So that's something to think about. And that's why I said going back to the order of operations that Dr. Tracy talked about, right? And are you even ready? Right. Dr. Tracy, what are your thoughts there on liver health?
Yeah, I agree with that. And also, detox herbs to detox the liver isn't necessarily, a lot of times when I've looked at those formulas, they're really intense.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and it's also partly about how you combine things.
Mm-hmm.
So, when we learn herbs, we also learn which ones don't go together, right? And so if you don't know that thing necessarily, just because it's natural doesn't mean that it goes with something else that's natural. It's not always chocolate and peanut butter. Not that we're all eating chocolate and peanut butter, but some things work really synergistically well together, and some things don't at all, or can counteract the effect that one of them is supposed to have, or together there may be an actual negative reaction. And so um, depending on a lot of things that I see like in the health food store that are like detoxes for liver, milk thistle's great, but you don't want, like, there are like limits to how to who should take that and how much of it. And a lot of times they have like 10 things in them and it's just overkill. And if you're detoxing the organ, yet you're putting all of this stuff through it at the same time, it's taxing. It's taxing to it.
Yeah, being gentle is important and knowing that a lot of these formulations, there's just the practical reality of marketing and competition. When somebody's shopping, they know what the consumer is looking for. They're like, oh, $30 for this bottle, there's only one thing in it. Versus, oh, this one has a giant list. I'm going to take that one. And then each one was just pixie dusted and doesn't even have a therapeutic value. But in combination, it's far too much for the body to process. So this is where formulating in itself is an art and a science, right? What is the right proportion? What is the right dosing? What is the right bottle? Where's the interactions that are positive and negative, right? And having guidance there is important. So more is not always more, right? If you look at the professional supplement lines that the functional medicine doctors use, the labels are very simple, right? Designs for Health, Thorne, AOR, if you were to go to the best functional medicine doctor wherever you are, the supplement brands that they use, which are commonly used, the labels are very simple, right? They have a therapeutic dose of one or two things to solve a specific problem. Now, you might end up with 10 bottles, right? Um, Based on your functional medicine doctor's approach. Um, but they don't look like your consumer products that you find at like Amazon and Whole Foods that like giant list makes me feel good, right? So knowing that overwhelm, and so this is partly because the supplement industry doesn't really have regulatory oversight, right? It's like the claims are true. These are good for your liver. These are good for your heart. But whoever ate, 55 bananas and 65 pieces of broccoli and 300 pineapples in one meal, which is what it would take to get that volume of nutrition, because the body actually processed that, right? So that's another thing to think about. So, okay, so Dr. Tracy, I've been urging people all night. We're about to close here. That if this sounds compelling, if this sounds appealing, and it's a path that you want to take because it's like I can solve my problems with food. I can solve my problems with things that grow from the ground that are meant to go in my body that have not been treated, processed, synthesized, right? I would humbly suggest that people do this with you or somebody else that knows what they're doing. I'm going to do that with you, by the way, right?
Great.
Yeah, I'm going to book some time with you and go through my stuff because in as much as this is what I live and breathe, there you'll never stop learning, right? And and as much as I'm healthy, I can still push harder and go to another level, right? So I'm going to book some time with you, and that's where I'd say that my suggestion is that, and I mean, that wasn't even the intention tonight, so I don't even know if there's like a booking link for you or anything, but if there is, whoever's here should share it. And if you already have someone that you know that does this work, then book with them. But I would not go in blind. Um, it's new frontier, and these are powerful tools. And there's so many. So work with someone that knows what they're doing, and the outcomes will be awesome. It'll be really, really awesome. These tools are powerful. I've used them before. My mom, when I was young, my dad used them on me. Didn't have allergies since that day, right? Like literally since that day, like looking for a cure, I actually had a cure, right? And our Western medicine, if it worked, then you wouldn't need to refill the prescription. There's no cure there, right? I literally got cured of allergies, don't have them anymore. So the mechanism of my organ health and all that is the path, but I don't have it anymore. So um, that's my last thought. Any other last thoughts from you, Dr. Tracy?
Um, I love herbs. I love that they're plants.
Yeah.
Um, uh, and but also making sure that I think that I'm kind of stuck on that liver question, which is making sure that you can detox properly.
Mm-hmm.
Is one of the best things in terms of detoxing your liver that you can do. And that's really where knowing your genetics and things like the Black Label line and things like that are supporting the system um, is really, really important. And then, yeah, let's let's do the herbs.
Yeah. Cool. All right. Well, thank you guys. This was fun. I think it's there, it's a whole new world for people to explore, and it's a very good world to explore. It's what was intended for you. These things grow on this planet for a reason. They're meant to heal you, right? So explore, enjoy, and we'll see you guys whenever we see you guys on the next call. All right.
Thanks for being here, Kashif. Thank
All
you.
right, guys. All right. Good night, everyone.